Welcome to episode 7 of the Fight Science Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Coach Adam Snyder. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I'm an active MMA fighter, and I'm a performance and recovery coach. Today is a really cool episode because it's the first time I'm live streaming the recording of this episode. So I have my other phone right here. We're live on Instagram, live streaming the entire episode, and I'm going to start live streaming every episode going forward on Instagram. And the reason I want to do that is for a couple of reasons. First, I just want more ways to connect with you and build our community and build just the relationship and connection that we have. We have so many fighters. I don't know the exact number of countries, but there's a lot of countries that are watching and listening to this podcast, which is amazing. I'm super grateful. So I just want more ways to connect. So that's one reason we're live streaming. The second reason is I just want to give some behind the scenes nuggets of information. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, or you didn't even know I have an Instagram and you just found us through the podcast, go follow me, Fight Science Collective, because on the podcast, when I go live, there's going to be a little Q&A at the end. There's going to be a little behind the scenes in the beginning. So you're going to get some more information out of it there. The third reason that I want to live stream it is just so I have a lot of followers on Instagram, and I know a lot of them don't even know about the podcast, which is pretty cool. So this gives them another way to consume the podcast, and if you want to see it early, you can jump on it early. So I'm kind of looking back and forth, looking at Instagram, looking at the main camera here, and so yeah, I'm really excited about it. So if you don't already, either way, like if you don't follow me on Instagram, go follow me on Instagram, and if you don't follow or subscribe to the podcast, go and do that. I do these episodes every single Monday. We talk about strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, mindset, and really just the lifestyle that it takes to be a professional athlete, to be a fighter, and to live a high performance lifestyle. Whether you're trying to be a pro or you're a hobbyist and want to live your life at an elite level, this podcast is going to be great for you. I'm really excited about today's episode. We're talking specifically about muscle growth or hypertrophy for fighters. You can think about this as hypertrophy 101, everything a fighter needs to know about growing muscle. And the reason I wanted to do an episode specifically about this, first, who doesn't want to have muscle and be jacked? I think every guy really wants to have muscle and be jacked. A lot of chicks out there that want to also. But the other reason, and the main reason, is little story time. I recently started working with a pro fighter, a high-level pro fighter who is going up a weight class. So he's done his entire career, amateur and his entire pro career, as a lightweight. And he's at an interesting point where he is right now, he's a little too heavy for lightweight, and he's a little too light for welterweight. And so the last couple of cuts have been challenging for him, and they're just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for him to fight at lightweight anymore, and so he needs to go up to welterweight. And so he joined the Fight Science Collective to help him with his transition from lightweight to welterweight. And so we need to put on some muscle so he can be the right size for the welterweight division, so he's not undersized. And so I'm a big believer in a white belt mentality. I've been in the sport since I was 5 years old. I went to school for exercise science. I graduated in 2019. I've been working with fighters since 2019, doing strength and conditioning and all of it. So I have a lot of experience in doing this, but it's pretty rare that you have a fighter come to you because they're looking to add on muscle and go up a weight class. So a dedicated hypertrophy phase for fighters is something that I don't typically do a lot. And so I wanted to brush up on my skills a little bit. So I was doing a little bit of research, really making sure that we could do it the right way. And I realized there isn't a lot of info about hypertrophy for fighting out there. And so that's why I wanted to make this episode, to give you everything that you need to know if you're looking to gain muscle as a combat athlete, a martial artist, a fighter. And that's what we're going to be doing in this episode today, which I'm pretty excited about. So I have some notes here to make sure that we cover everything. I don't want to forget everything. I want to jam pack this thing with value. So I think first and foremost, we need to talk about like, why would you even want to gain muscle as a fighter? I talk to a lot of fighters that are afraid of even lifting weights because they think that lifting and gaining muscle will make them slow or make them immobile or hurt them. They'll get injured or it will take away from their performance and training. And I know a lot of fighters that think lifting will make it harder to cut weight. And obviously, if you're gaining muscle, you're going to get heavier. And so if you're at a good size for your weight class, it's probably not a good idea to focus on hypertrophy. But there are really three main reasons that as a fighter, I think you should focus on hypertrophy. The first is if you need to go up a weight class, like my client that I'm working with. If you're a little too heavy for your current weight class, but a little light for the next weight class up, you need to gain some muscle to go up to the next weight class. Okay. The second reason that I would prioritize muscle growth and a hypertrophy phase is if you are undersized for your weight class. So maybe you're in the right weight class and you're not heavy enough, or it just wouldn't be feasible for you to put on enough muscle to go up to the next weight class. It's too big of a jump, but you're a little too heavy to go down a weight class. You can go through a hypertrophy phase, go through a muscle growth phase to fill the gaps and just be a better size for the weight class that you're in. And then the third reason I would say to be in a really focused hypertrophy muscle growth phase is if you're struggling with a lot of nagging injuries. I see this with a lot of guys that are not consistent in the weight room or have little to no weight room experience, and they're just dealing with injuries all the time. It's typically because A, they don't have a lot of muscle, and B, they're not very strong. And so if this is you, we need to add some muscle. We got to get you more jacked, and then we got to get you stronger, and this might help with your injuries. It probably will help a lot, actually. And so that's the three reasons that I would focus on muscle growth and hypertrophy if you were a fighter. Okay, really, really important. So, some common myths and misconceptions about adding muscle as a fighter. You hear it all the time. We touched on some of these, right? Like, if I get jacked, if I add more muscle, it's going to slow me down. I'm going to lose mobility. I'm going to gas out. You hear these things all the time. And a lot of the evidence that people might present for this is, well, look at bodybuilders, right? Bodybuilders are slow. Bodybuilders are not explosive. Bodybuilders lack mobility. Bodybuilders have no cardio, right? They're jacked, but they don't have the right kind of conditioning for fighting. And look, the reality is that correlation does not equal causation, right? Just because bodybuilders lack these qualities that MMA fighters need, or any fighters need really, it doesn't mean it's the muscles' fault. It's just they don't train speed or power or strength, maybe a little bit, or cardio, right? I think a good example, I heard this was that, and I liked it a lot from another strength coach, was that, if you stopped training a striking sport like Muay Thai to focus solely on jiu-jitsu, your striking is going to get worse. But it's not the jiu-jitsu's fault that your striking is getting worse. You're just not training striking anymore. And it's the same thing, right? Like, if you lose power or speed or mobility or cardio because you're putting on muscle, it's not the muscle's fault. You're just not training those other athletic qualities. And so it's important to understand that when you're going into a muscle growth or a hypertrophy phase, there might be a little bit of a trade-off. You might lose a little bit of conditioning. You might lose a little bit of strength. You might lose a little bit of speed and power. You can maintain some of it if you still have power, strength, conditioning exercises throughout your program while you're in your hypertrophy phase. But then you also have to have the foresight and know, like, once my hypertrophy block is over, I'm going to go into a strength phase. I'm going to go into a power phase. I'm going to invest more time into conditioning, and I'm going to fill those gaps once the main goal that we're trying to accomplish has been achieved. And that's where the structure and the periodization and the timing and the intent of your muscle growth phase comes into play and why it's so important, right? If you're 8 weeks out for a fight and you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to pack on some muscle. This is the wrong time to focus on muscle growth. This is the wrong time. It will 100% negatively impact your performance on fight night. So we have to make sure that we do not have a fight planned. We have enough of an off camp where we can invest all of our time and energy into building muscle the right way. And then we have enough time to build other athletic qualities like speed or power or strength or conditioning after the hypertrophy phase has been completed. So with my pro that I'm working with right now, we're in a dedicated hypertrophy block. So these next 3 months, our sole focus is on hypertrophy, adding muscle. That means he's not fighting until like April or March. Maybe even May is when we would get him into the cage again, because we are taking the time. We're going to take November, we're going to take December, we're going to take January to add the muscle on in this off camp. Then we're going to go into a pre-camp where we start transitioning him more into fight speed mode. And then we can have a good 8, 6, 10 week camp to really peak for fight. So for a fight. So how we structure and periodize his different phases and training focuses around his schedule, around his skill training, around the different phases of the fight cycle that he's in. And it's so important. So that's the first thing. You have to know, okay, when are we strategically introducing hypertrophy training? When are we focusing on muscle growth? That's the first box that we need to check. All right. Once you have that box checked, we have to figure out, all right, how many days a week do we need to lift in order to adequately build muscle without it taking away from our other skills training too much? Because the reality is you are not a bodybuilder, especially if you're an MMA fighter. You have to lift and you have to do striking, maybe Muay Thai and boxing. You have to wrestle, you have to do jiu-jitsu, you have to spar, you have to train MMA on its own. There are so many skill demands that are required to be a successful fighter. You cannot lift every single day. It's probably going to wreck you for your mat training and you're not going to be able to recover for it. So when we decide our frequency, how many days a week we're going to lift for gaining muscle, we have to make sure that it doesn't take away from your skills training too much. There's going to be a little bit of a dip, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we have to make sure that we can adequately recover, because if we're just wrecked all the time and going at 100 all the time and sore and tired all the time, well, you're not actually going to recover or build any muscle, because the growth and the building happens in the recovery phase. So knowing your frequency is really important. I typically recommend in the off camp for fighters that are trying to build muscle, doing anywhere from 3 to 4 days a week. 4 days a week might be pushing it, but if your skills, training, and intensity and volume is low enough, or you just have a crazy recovery curve, then you can probably squeeze in 4 days. Grapplers could probably do really well with 4 days. MMA fighters, specifically like this pro that I'm working with, we're opting for a 3-day option. That's going to be perfect. He's going to be able to gain the muscle that he needs. He's going to be able to be a good size for the next weight class up, and it's not going to take away too much from his on-mat training, okay? There is going to be a little bit of a drop in performance on the mat. And we had a really clear and honest conversation about this, because the truth is, like, in order to gain muscle, you have to damage the muscle and you have to create heat in the muscle, which means you're going to failure, which means you're leaving sessions pretty sore. There's going to be fatigue and soreness from hypertrophy training. This is just a byproduct of building muscle, right? You need to damage the muscle in order to build muscle. By damaging the muscle, then your body will repair it. Your muscle fibers will get thicker. And this is what having more muscle is. We're not adding muscle. We're just making the muscle that you currently have thicker. And this requires fatigue. It's just the reality of it. Like, you need heat and you need damage, and that's what is going to build muscle. And so as a byproduct of that, you're going to be sore, and that is probably going to show up on the mat. You're probably going to be a little bit more sore when you're grappling or sparring or hitting the pads. You might feel a little bit slower. You might feel like your conditioning might take a hit a little bit because you're putting more energy and investing more time into building muscle, not some of the other qualities that you're used to. And so anytime I work with an athlete, a fighter, a client that's going to build muscle, I always tell them, like, for a couple months, you're going to be sore. For a couple months, you're not going to perform at the same level that you're used to performing at. And that's okay. This is intentional. It's called a peak for a reason, right? Like, you can't be peaking all the time. We need to peak leading up to a fight. So we have to accept that for the next 2 to 3 months, our off-mat training, our skills training, our tactical training might take a little bit less of a priority to really prioritize the growth of your muscle. So having the right mindset going into this is really important. So, we understand when we're focusing on muscle growth, how many days a week, your frequency are we going to invest into actually building muscle that we need. The mindset that's necessary when it comes to building muscle is really important. The other thing that's super important is exercise selection. Let's see, best nutrition for muscle recovery. We're going to talk about nutrition. Don't worry, I got you. It's on the notes. I got it all right here with my 3rd grade handwriting. All right, we're going to talk nutrition. Don't worry. So exercise selection is the next thing that is really important for building muscle, because when it comes to bodybuilding training for fighting, we want to use the same principles that bodybuilders might use to build muscle and get larger, but we don't want to train our body in the same way a bodybuilder might. A bodybuilder is going to focus on specific muscle groups or specific body parts, like a bicep day, a chest day, a back day, a push day, a pull day. And this is because they're trying to work on symmetry here. So they need to put all of their energy into focusing on one muscle group to get the maximum return in that muscle group. And B, they're lifting 5-6 days a week. And so they can afford to focus on individual muscle groups and individual patterns of movement because they just have the frequency. They don't have other sports that they need to put their time into. Their sport is bodybuilding. So we have to get a little bit more creative with how do we build muscle? What muscles do we build without it taking too much away from our skill training? And so when I'm designing a program for a fighter really any, not just the muscle building phase, but any fighter, any strength and conditioning program that I'm designing, I need to make sure that I'm getting a squat pattern in there. We need to make sure that there's a horizontal push, a horizontal pull, a vertical push, a vertical pull. We need to make sure that there's some kind of hinging movement pattern in there. We have to make sure that there's a single leg movement pattern in there. We have to make sure that we have some level of rotation and some level of trunk or carry work in there as well. I also like to maintain some kind of power movement, whether it's a plyometric, an Olympic variation, a ballistic exercise, even when we're doing an hypertrophy phase, because we're still athletes, we're still fighters. I don't want to take away all of our explosiveness and power, so we still sneak some kind of dynamic movement in there as well. And so my job as a strength and conditioning coach is to figure out the best way to structure a program, to design and incorporate all of these exercises in enough volume and frequency that your muscle will actually grow in a way that's not going to trash you for the rest of your training sessions. And so this is why I like full body training sessions. So like with this pro, we're doing 3 full body training sessions a week. And typically I like to, in my session design, choose exercises that do not cross over or interfere with each other. So I try to select exercises from different movement patterns and different muscle groups. So we're not creating too much fatigue in one muscle or one movement pattern in a session. So this will help us reduce injury and maximize recovery. So a session could look like, I'm going to start with some kind of warm up. I typically like to do 2 to 3 exercises of high volume movements that are preparing us for the compound movements in the lift today. So if my primary movement is going to be a squat and my secondary movement is going to be like a vertical pull, then I'll probably do some accessory work to warm up my shoulders, warm up my hips, warm up my knees. It could be band pull aparts, it could be goblet squats, it could be lunges, just high volume, really low intensity to get the body warmed up. So that's what my warm up might look like. Then I might go into some kind of power movement. This could be no, this is not pre-recorded. This is live. The Q&A, I'm getting it. So this could be some kind of power movement, like a ballistic exercise. That's a med ball throw, plyometric, we're jumping, Olympic variation, cleans, pulls, snatches, things like that. Really important. Then we'll go into our primary compound movement. So in this session, let's say it's a Zercher squat, right? We're going to do a Zercher squat. That's going to be our main primary compound movement. Then I like to choose a secondary compound movement, something like, maybe a vertical pull, like a pull-up, or a horizontal pull, like a row could be a great option. Then we could work a single leg movement in there, maybe a Bulgarian split squat we could throw in there. We could throw some kind of trunk work in, maybe a carry, maybe we're going to do our rotational work. I like maybe like a plate halo, something like that. And most of my sessions are going to be designed using compound movements. But then I always like to sneak some accessory movements in there, specifically areas that are going to target where you're at risk for injury in your sport. So for an MMA fighter specifically, you might struggle with neck injuries or shoulder injuries or elbow injuries or knee injuries. And so the accessory work that we're going to do is going to build resilience around these injury prone areas. Ideally, I like to put more emphasis on our posterior chain or the back of our body, because we spend all of our time in the front of our body, like especially as a fighter, we're here when we're striking, we're here when we're grappling. So we need to really counter that and open up a little bit. And usually if we're getting injuries in our shoulders, our knees, our ankles, our elbows, it's because we have some kind of weakness in our posterior chain. So we could be targeting the neck directly, training our traps, training our lats, lower back, triceps, hamstrings, glutes are all really important. I'll also use some anterior chain exercises, so quads for your knees, biceps for your elbows are really important as well. As someone that has torn my bicep tendon and my ACL, it's super important that you have bicep work and quad work in your program as well. So I'll do 1 or 2 exercises of accessory work around key injury areas, and we'll just get pumps in those areas. And then when it comes to designing the other sessions, I'll just design them in a way where I'm not repeating exercises or movement patterns, and making sure that the design of the program complements each day and complements the skill training. So like I said earlier, we're maximizing our muscle growth without negatively impacting the skill training, which is so important. All right. So we've talked about a lot of things so far. We're going to keep it rolling. Okay. We've talked about why you might want to add some muscle, when to prioritize it, how to structure it around your training and your fighting. We talked about the frequency, how many days a week you want to lift and train. We talked about exercise selection, which is really important. Now let's talk about reps, sets, weight that you want to use in order to build muscle. Building muscle, like I said earlier, the main 2 things that are going to help you to build muscle is damage and heat in the muscle. Okay, that's what we need. We need to be working too close to failure in order to create the damage needed for your body to be like, oh shit, like this is a level of stress that we're not used to. We need to get bigger and thicker for this to happen. Okay, we're getting a question, 1 second. Sorry for the interpretation, but if I'm going through an injury, such as a knee injury, is it okay to keep the same training pattern or should I stop? That's a great question. We're jumping all over the place. I don't think I'll typically do this where I'll answer questions in the middle. We'll save them for the end. I'll answer it right now because I read it. It really depends. If most likely we should change it. Most likely we should run you through a system diagnostics to identify what is causing the actual injury itself and if what you're doing is making the injury worse. And then we need to adjust the plan to focus on building the other areas of your body while also rehabbing and making the injury better. I hope that helped. Okay, back to the topics. I'm not going to do that anymore. reps, sets, weights, volume, and intensity. Okay. These are the different variables that we are going to manipulate in order to cause the damage and heat that's needed for your muscle to grow. And so when it comes to designing a strength and conditioning program for muscle growth, I use two methods in order to deliver the volume and intensity and honestly the time under tension, how long your muscle is sustaining damage, that will create the heat and damage that will elicit muscle growth. And so the first method is called the repetition method. This is high volume training. So we're probably working anywhere from like 3 to 10 sets of like 8 to 20 reps. Okay. High volume, high reps. The idea here, the weight's going to be moderate to low. And the idea is we're working close to failure. Okay, we're working close to failure, getting to the point where we can no longer do a rep with good technique, and then we need to stop. This is so necessary because if you are not working close or at failure, if you're not going to failure, your muscle's not going to grow. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to have enough damage in there. And so we need to work as close to failure as possible. Not necessarily like mechanical failure where like you can't do another rep. We might get there sometimes, but more technical failure where your technique starts to break down. You're not doing reps well anymore. That's where we need to stop. Okay. And so we use the repetition method for that. The second method that we use, which I love, is called the tempo method. With the tempo method, we are doing our reps, the concentric and eccentric portions of the movement, so the lowering and the raising portions of the movement for a prescribed time. So for this pro that I'm working with, let's say it's a bicep curl, right? He might be lowering the concentric point of the movement for 3 seconds. He has no pause at the bottom, and he's contracting or raising a dumbbell for 3 seconds, and then no pause at the top. And so we're using the this tempo method to have constant tension on the muscle for a really slow and controlled time. And tempo isn't necessary. It's not required in order to build muscle, but I love using the tempo method to build muscle, specifically with fighters, because it allows you to maximize muscle growth while minimizing total workload, right? By really focusing on the tempo and going slow and controlled, I can accomplish what I could have done by doing, 4 sets of 20 by maybe just doing 3 sets of 12, okay? And so I'm reducing the total volume on the body, less reps, less sets. So it's going to save time. Chances are you're not going to be in the gym as long. And then also it's going to reduce the overall stress on the body. And so you can maximize muscle growth while limiting its impact that it has on the mat. So you can maximize recovery as well. Really important, which is why I love the tempo method. So repetition method, tempo method. This is the rep scheme that I'm going to use with my clients when I create a hypertrophy program for them. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the training aspect of it, right? How to design a specific program built around muscle growth. You can have the best training in the world. You can be the hardest worker in the world. You can have the most perfectly designed program for building muscle as a fighter. But if you are not recovering from that shit, you are not going to grow. You are not going to build muscle. You are not going to get better. Your muscle grows. Not even just your muscle, like any growth that you're trying to make, any improvements that you're trying to make, it happens in your recovery, not from the work that you do. We need to work hard, but then we need to recover even harder, which is why I'm a big believer in having 1 day off, complete rest day. I like to have an active recovery day in there as well. We have a whole podcast on recovery. I think it's episode 3, so you can go check that out. We dive into that a little bit more, but you want to make sure that you're sleeping 7, 8, 9 hours a night. You want to make sure that your program is intelligently designed. You want to make sure that you're managing your stress levels as much as possible, probably tracking some kind of heart rate data, resting heart rate variability, so it's kind of like your body's check engine light, right? Like when you can push the pace and when you need to pull back a little bit. And so optimizing your recovery while also following an intelligently designed plan that's backed by science is going to be the best way for you to build muscle as a fighter. All right. Super important to maximize recovery. The other aspect of this is nutrition. Okay. Nutrition is so important for the recovery side of it, but you also need to have enough materials for your muscle to grow. You'd be following a really, really great hypertrophy plan, but if you're not eating enough food, if you're not eating enough calories, doesn't matter how hard you work, you're just not going to grow. And that's why it always makes me laugh when fighters are like, oh, I don't want to lift because it's going to bulk me up and then I'm not going to be able to make weight. Well, no, that's not how it works. Like, if you're eating in a deficit and you're lifting weights, you're not going to magically gain muscle. It's not going to wreck your weight cut. If you are lifting weights and you're eating in a surplus, then yeah, you're going to bulk up. And yeah, it's going to be harder to cut weight. But if you're not lifting weights and you're in a surplus, you're going to bulk up and gain weight. It's not going to be the weight that you want, but that's going to hurt your weight cut too. So lifting weights isn't going to hurt your weight cut. I just want to throw that out there. Now, to gain muscle and gain mass, you need to lift weights following the right kind of plan, and you need to be in a calorie surplus. You need to eat more calories than you burn in a day. And there's lots of equations to calculate this. Maybe we can talk about that another time. That's not what this podcast is about today. Ideally, anywhere from like 250 to 500 calories, maybe even like 600, 700 calories of a surplus above our total daily energy expenditure, how many calories you burn a day, is the sweet spot of where you want to be to build muscle. I always like to start on the lower end and then add calories versus as going as big as possible, especially in muscle growth for fighters. We don't want any kind of like dirty bulk bullshit. We want to make sure we are minimizing the body fat that we're adding on as well. So bulking as lean as possible, adding lean mass as much as we can is so important, because especially from a weight cut perspective, it's much easier to pull water from a muscle to cut weight than it is to burn fat in order to make weight. So we want to be as lean as possible in our muscle growth phase. Now, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of fat added onto the body. That's inevitable. But when we manipulate our calories and our macros, which is your protein, your carbs, and fat, in the right way, then we can limit our fat growth and maximize our muscle growth, which is going to be great for your weight cutting process as well. Okay. Typically, a gram of protein per pound of body weight is what we shoot for. And then we just fill the rest in with carbs and fats. I typically like to time carbs close to training. So 4 hours before you train, have a big meal. 2 hours before you train, have a high carb snack. 1 hour before you train, get 30 to 60 grams of simple carbohydrates in. We could cycle carbs, so like higher carbs on higher intensity training days, lower carbs on lower intensity or rest days. But for like muscle growth, I don't think carb cycling is as important. I think just getting the calories in is the most important thing for this muscle growth phase that we're in. And then when we're getting into cutting weight or optimizing performance or really peaking for a fight, then timing our carbs can be a little bit more beneficial. But for muscle growth, I don't think it's as necessary. Like with my pro, we're not doing that. He just has his calories and his macros. His protein goal is the most important thing, and hitting his calorie goal is really important. And that's what's allowing him to build. And he's a fucking monster. He's fucking huge right now. And it's only been a couple phases. Well, not even a full phase. He's like on his third week, which is awesome. He's seeing great progress. He's going to crush it at welterweight, which I'm really excited for. So your nutrition is really important. You can throw some supplements in there as well. Like a whey protein is a great option if you have a hard time getting your protein in through whole foods. A whey protein is going to be a great option. Creatine is an awesome supplement that's going to help. Anything that's going to maximize your recovery, so things that are going to help with sleep, things that are going to help with reducing stress can be really important. The key with muscle growth is, we want to have some inflammation in our body. This is what's going to signal your body to grow the muscle. And so a lot of fighters will take anti-inflammatories just because of how intense training is, something like a curcumin supplement or even like ibuprofen. And typically I'm pro like curcumin or anti-inflammatory supplementation to help increase recovery for training. But in the sake in the example of muscle growth, I probably would be more strategic about when I introduce like a curcumin supplement, if I even do it at all, because that might interfere and reduce some of the gains that you make with hypertrophy. So like if you're taking curcumin or another anti-inflammatory supplement, either take it on days when you're not lifting or you're not focusing on your muscle growth, or you just pause until that phase or block is over and then can reintroduce it when your skill training intensity and volume increases, frequency increases, and you switch your strength and conditioning to a different focus. Okay. Again, most supplements are bullshit. Those are a handful of them that actually do things. Okay. Balancing in condition is the last note that I have on here. Balancing in conditioning. So typically, I like to keep the conditioning a little bit lower when we're in a hypertrophy phase, especially if it's like aerobic work, because if we're doing long duration cardio, aerobic work, this could have some crossover and interference with our hypertrophy training. So if we're going to condition, because I think there should be 1 or 2 sessions just to kind of maintain your conditioning at a good level. I like explosive bursts. I like high intensity bursts where we're doing shorter work intervals, maybe 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 15 seconds, and then we're resting another 20, 30, 15 seconds in between. So I like interval training and not a ton of volume. Like we're not doing 3-minute rounds, 5-minute rounds. We're not simulating the fight. Maybe we're doing 5 minutes just to maintain your conditioning. It doesn't take a whole lot of volume to maintain the conditioning that we have. And the reason I want to do this is just so we're not building too much of a conditioning deficit. And then when the hypertrophy phase is over, we can switch focuses, change the program up, increase the volume, intensity, frequency, specificity of conditioning that we're doing. But once the hypertrophy phase is over. All right. I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about today when it comes to hypertrophy. I know there was a lot in this episode. I wanted to cram as much into it as I possibly can. So we'll do a quick little summary and then we'll wrap things up and I'll send you on your way for today. So lifting weights, every fighter should do it. Gaining muscle specifically for fighting though is something that needs to be strategic and intentional and planned. Maybe you're going up a weight class. Maybe you are trying to fill out in your current weight class, or maybe you have some injury issues and you need to be more resilient against injury. That's when we would add some hypertrophy in there. It's really important that you know when you're going to prioritize your hypertrophy phase. No fights planned, far out, away from a camp, so you have the time to really pack on muscle the right way and then build some other qualities. Once you finish your hypertrophy phase, then we can focus on strength or power or speed or explosiveness or cardio. But we're going to put all of our energy into the actual hypertrophy, which is really important. We talked about how many days a week you should be lifting for hypertrophy. We talked about what exercise to select, the reps and sets and weights and tempo to be doing. We talked about recovery. We talked about conditioning. We talked about nutrition. We talked about supplementation. We jam-packed this episode. And so I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you loved it. I've been loving doing these. They've been really, really fun. I actually didn't think I would like doing the podcast as much as I've liked doing it, but we've been pretty consistent here, 7 podcasts, which is badass. We're going to keep pumping them out every single Monday, and we're going to keep going live every single Monday doing these as well. We didn't get a ton of live viewers, and that's okay. It's the first time that we're doing this. I don't really go live a lot, so this live number is going to keep going up and up and up. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to have this skill set, have this experience, have this knowledge, and share it with you and help a little bit. So thanks. I can't do this without you. I love what I do. I've been training my whole life. I've been coaching for as long as I can remember. I get to work with fighters and people that I love every single day. So thank you so much. If you're watching or listening to the podcast and you don't follow me on Instagram. Go follow me on Instagram at Fight Science Collective. If you're watching live and you didn't even know that we do a podcast, keep an eye out. Honestly, stories are going to be the place to watch when I drop new episodes. But you can shoot me a DM if you want me to send you the link. We're on all major podcasting platforms. If there are any specific topics that you want me to cover about strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, mindset, lifestyle, just fighting and training, martial arts in general, I have no memories of my life of not training like kickboxing or jujitsu and doing this shit. So I have a really, really just a large bank of memory and experience doing this, and I can talk about it all day. So if there's anything specifically that you want me to cover, let me know either in the comments of this podcast or the comments of this live, or you can shoot me a DM. You can shoot me an email, whatever. You can fucking send me a Raven, however you want to get it to me. Let me know. I guess I'll leave like 30 seconds. Are there any questions on Instagram? I know that I was just doing the outro, but are there any specific quick Instagram questions that we can cover? I'll open up for like 30 seconds. I know there's not a lot of people here, but just in case, I want to make sure. Very generous, you know? Nope. No questions. A lot of people seem to have gotten a lot out of it, learned a lot. So that's amazing. I appreciate the support. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Peace.